Hello, everyone. Welcome back to episode number 9 of YGN Nature of the Business. I'm David,
And I'm Monique.
and we are really excited to bring this episode because it's bigger than just business. Mother's Day was this weekend. Monique is a mother and she's a CEO, and that probably requires a unique set of time management and balancing skills that you have to perfect or figure out and navigate. And so we wanted to talk to Monique about what it's like being a CEO and a mom, and your journey as being a mom and the kind of intertwining of that with YGN. And so you've told this story before, but I'd love to talk a little bit about how being a mother gave you the inspiration for starting YGN. So why don't we start there?
So I started YGN right after having my first child. My first child is 9 years old, so that kind of lines up. So I started right after she was born, and at the time, I was wearing just loose natural hair, loose textured natural hair, and the regimen of it just didn't have time for it. I may have just been like low energy or whatever it is, but in that moment, like my hair was suffering because I didn't have the time or the energy or the bandwidth to think about hair. And so I was wearing a lot of head wraps at the time, and because of that, the birth of YGN happened because head wraps also can damage your hair if they're not satin lined, and it was causing issues with my hair. That was the birth of our first product, and it came from a place of motherhood.
Yeah, that's cool. As far as this kind of this idea of the birth of YGN, I'm sure it's hard to be a mother and be present, and also companies require its own unique set of attention and energy. How over the years how you manage being a mom and being a CEO, how has that evolved over the 8 year span or 7 year 8 year span of YGN?
So when you have kids, a lot of times the issues will pop up in your interactions with them. So you start a business, you don't really think about how that's going to affect maybe the way that you interact with your kids, or how it's going to affect the time that you have to spend with your kids, or maybe you do and you can't really grasp the full concept of it. So you learn from your interactions with your children what they need and uh, how you need to adjust the things that you do outside of parenting. So, especially being a CEO, a lot of times that can take up so much of your time, and it can easily just cannibalize everything that happens around you, even in your home life. And I've learned I do a whole lot of setting boundaries. So, of just not doing work when I'm home, setting time when I'm not doing work at home, making sure that I show up, making sure that I show up for the events, and making space and time to spend time with the kids. It's something that you have to do very deliberately, especially when you are a CEO, because it can easily take up a whole lot of your time.
Yeah, Madison's 9 years old, and you also have a son. And how old is he?
Max is 2, just turned 2.
Yeah, and that was 2 years ago that Max was born. And why don't you describe a little bit about the time of being pregnant with Max and the time that we were in as we were building YGN?
Yes, I found out I was pregnant with Max like maybe a year after we really began scaling. And as you begin scaling, you inevitably hit some obstacles, and we hit some obstacles at YGN during that time. And so it was a very hectic moment in the company, but surprisingly, being pregnant kind of grounded me in that it allowed me to have perspective around the things that were going on, and really ground my own emotions and my own mental space, because of course as you're pregnant you have to manage your stress even more carefully. And so I think that it was actually helpful during that time for me as a CEO to be pregnant because it allowed me to really put things in perspective.
That's cool. That's really interesting. So what were some of the things that you did to ground yourself through that time, through that period?
I actually did a whole lot of meditation, a whole lot of just setting time apart and taking time to clear my head, taking time in the morning I built a habit of going for walks in the morning, early in the morning during that time. And it's just like really intentional practices that you put into place, whatever works for you. But that's what I did at that time, just to be sure that I was managing my stress appropriately.
Were there any surprising or unexpected challenges, I guess, as you navigated both being pregnant with Max and running YGN? You know, you mentioned that we were scaling at that point in time. There's a whole host of things that you're addressing. But is there anything that like sticks out in your mind as a surprise or a challenge as you were moving through that period of time?
Yeah, I think Max was only 1 or 2 months old when we had a flood at the factory. That was very unexpected. It was already a challenging time, but then to navigate the flood was very difficult with a pretty much a newborn child. So that I think that was the most unexpected expected thing that we went through. But for some reason, in moments like that, you have to find peace. It's necessary to find peace in order to remain grounded for your kids.
Mm-hmm. It's I think somewhere there's a picture of post flood you changing Max on a sewing table or a packing table where in this space. Yeah, so Max was there from the jump. He came out and he was a member of the YGN team from almost day zero. What was
He was on all of our Zoom calls. He was a really great baby. He wasn't very fussy at all. He showed up on Zoom. He showed up in the office. I had a pack and play up until maybe last week in my office for Max. And it wasn't until he turned about 6 months old that I actually ended up enrolling him in daycare because up to that point he really just was my sidekick. He hung out with me.
how did you decide you had Max and obviously you had to decide how long you stayed out. How much time did you decide to take when you had Max?
Officially, I believe it was 3 months, but I was on calls maybe a week out from when I gave birth. Just because the company was going through so much at the time, and it was difficult, especially when babies is very young. As long as you as a mother are recovering, they sleep most of the time anyway. So I spent a whole lot of time while he was napping, just taking calls and working, and I did that basically a week out from when he was born.
And how did people, you're the CEO showing up with your baby here on Zoom calls. How do you think people perceive that? Was it a good reception? Did you get any kind of blowback from that?
I didn't get any blowback, but people aren't going to tell you exactly what they're thinking.
Mhm.
But I didn't. I started this company to create a space for myself to be myself, and I think very little about the judgments of others. I did what I needed to do in order to make it through that time, and what people thought is what they thought. Now I know my employees were surprised to see me so soon. I don't think they expected to see me so soon, but we made it work. We're a family over here.
So, in what ways did the team support? Are there any kind of moments where you're like, man, I'm really happy that I have this extended family to as a CEO? Are there any moments that stand out in your mind?
Not any particular moments, but everyone was just so welcoming to not only to me as a new mom or second time new mom, but to the baby, and have employees who gave us their clothes. They threw us a baby shower, and it was really just like everyone was just so happy to meet Max at that time. And even with Madison was 3 when we opened the factory out here in Dallas, and she had about 20 ants on the sewing floor of just like everyone knows her, and they were teaching her Spanish and giving her candy, and it's just everyone just embraces us as a family.
Hmm. Yeah, that's cool that, like you said, you, again, going back to this idea of designing a space where we can you can be yourself and kids can come and those types of things. There was a time when I remember when we had to set up a mini daycare in YGN during COVID. What was that like?
It was wild. It was wild. I think I might have been in a bit over my head, and props to all the daycare workers out there because y'all are a talented bunch of people. But it was during COVID and kids were home and we were working in the factory all day. It's not even like we were working from home. And so and I happen to, we were in a space and in an industry where it's female dominated. Like sewing is not a space where a lot of men work. And it was just necessary if I wanted to have a staff to give them a place kids. And so we had a space in our building. We made it safe for the kids. We set up with desks and tables, and they had their at home school, their remote school stuff that they had to do during the day. We hired a sitter. And that was that. We all split the cost of childcare, and they did that upstairs in our building. So that was an interesting time for sure.
It's a funny thing to think about, these just doing what you have to do, whether that's managing your stress, whether that's like setting up your little pack and play in the office, whether it's setting up a mini daycare to support. It's, you just have to figure out that right balance and what the right answer to a challenge is, even in parenting. As a mother, does at all having a daughter and having a son, does that impact how you approach product development? Does it get any other different juices flowing other than you would have otherwise have had?
Yeah, there have been times when my children have been the inspiration for product development. So with our swim product, we had already launched the first version of it, but I enrolled my daughter. She's a great swimmer. I enrolled her on the swim team the next year, and she had to wear one of those regular silicone caps that they all wear. And that was the first time when I realized that it really is a problem for Black women because not only did her hair not really fit in the cap, as soon as she got in the water, it fell right off because her hair, she had really long locks at the time and her hair weighed it down. She couldn't even participate in the activity in the way that she was intended to because the caps that were out there were not working for her hair. And that is such an interesting experience to have. It's not unique to Black people because things are often designed with the Eurocentric idea in mind, but it's not a unique experience to not be thought of first when it comes to products that you have to use on a day-to-day basis as a Black person. But it was something that was very prominent in that moment when she was swimming, that product just did not work for her at all.
I think also with kids, especially, they don't want to feel left out or different. And so if you're going to swim class and you can't swim, or you have to worry about your hair, it just, I would imagine it just isn't as fun and you can't be as free.
And on the other side of it, my daughter really hates having things on her head. So when a lot of times people ask, "Oh, do you make these for kids?" It The ways in which I would design a children's product, or if I decide to do it at all, are really inspired by the way she reacts to how things go on her head and accessories that you would wear on your hair. In both ways, whether it inspires how I have designed some products, but it's also decided whether it's affected whether I design them at all.
Mhm. Yeah, that's interesting. That's really interesting. Hopefully there are moms out there listening. And as a mom, if someone who was either starting a business or is currently running a business or just has a career day to day and is thinking, has their own ideas and inspirations, what advice would you give them, either in starting or in navigating being there for your family and at the same time pursuing your ideas or your dreams?
The most important thing I would say is having the right support system around you. My husband, my spouse, is my partner. He's amazing with the kids. It can't be. I think that's really important um, to my success as a CEO. So making sure you have whatever village you have around you, making sure it's in place so that there will be moments when you fall a little short because you're having to do both at the same time. And so making sure you have that support system around you is really important. Um, and the other thing would be to, again, be very intentional about setting time for both. And it's going to be difficult in the beginning because, especially in the beginning of starting a company, you have to be completely obsessed and consumed with it in order to be successful. But it's important to set that time. And I would even consider it as part of, as your path to success, is setting that time within your day to spend time with your kids.
Mm-hmm. As far as I think our mom, it's an interesting thing to think about. Our mom taught you how to sew, and that obviously impacted where you are. As far as your role in motherhood, how do you hope or think your this work impacts if you had to decide? How do you think it would impact your daughter and what she decides to pursue in life?
I hope that she sees that it's up to you to create your own reality, which I think she does. When we talk to her about like what she might want to do or how she wants to start thinking about her career, and we talk about it often, it's always, oh, I could just be a boss, or it's just feel like there's so many ways in which we create limitations around our kids as we raise them. But I hope that her watching us build and have the freedom to build the life that we want, it shows her that there's more freedom than sometimes you may think.
Mm-hmm. That's great. I love that. And as being like navigating the world of women in leadership, specifically in entrepreneurship, how do you think that is evolving your ability to bring your kids to work? How do you think the idea of women in leadership is evolving? And how do you think that's impacting society at large?
What I'm noticing is that we're seeing so many emerging entrepreneurs, especially coming out of COVID when everyone had time to sit down and really think about how they wanted to structure their life. You're seeing so many emerging, especially female entrepreneurs. And I believe Black female entrepreneurs is the largest growing segment of entrepreneurship right now, which is amazing. And it's creating spaces where there's a diversity of just perspective on product, perspective on different spaces, and there's a diversity of just solutions for underserved people, and that's why the markets are booming now in specifically underserved spaces. And so I think that's really amazing, and we're seeing so many women do it and do it well. So I think it's so cool to watch.
I think being unabashed, being a mom, and the fullness of not just being a one-dimensional CEO or whatever that is, I think there's a really powerful idea behind that. We've done a couple of Mother's Day campaigns featuring you and your family. What is that like, and what made you decide that was the route to go in on for our Mother's Day campaigns in the past?
Motherhood has always been, because of the way that the company was been a cornerstone of who we are as a brand. There are mothers that are really just like the keystone customers of our company.
Mm-hmm.
And coming from a place of motherhood was important, especially me as a founder, and having that be as part of the inspiration for the brand. And it came naturally, me being a mom, it being Mother's Day, to represent the brand in a way that really honors mothers and their place in the YGN family.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think, and we had in that campaign, we had other influencers and their moms. So I thought it was a really cool, broad idea of it's not novel, but just how we executed that, I thought it was really powerful. And I think that with the YGN audience, our community of customers, especially women, it is a very broad. Our customers range from early 20s all the way through to 45 and up. And celebrating that idea.
If you made it this far, it looks like we had technical difficulties. We hope you enjoyed this episode. If you have any questions, email us at contact@yougonatural.com or natureofthebusiness@yougonatural.com. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll talk to you guys next week. Take care.